The hustle and bustle of airport terminals always carried a certain energy. People rushing to gates, emotional goodbyes, and anticipatory hellos. Among the sea of travelers at International Airport stood Darius Coleman, a commanding presence in his perfectly tailored navy suit. As the CEO of Coleman Enterprises, a company he had built from the ground up into a multi-billion-dollar empire, Darius was accustomed to commanding attention without seeking it. Today was supposed to be just another business trip, a quick flight to Geneva for a merger that would solidify his company's European expansion. The merger documents sat neatly in his Italian leather briefcase, representing months of work and strategic planning. For Darius, this wasn't just another deal. It was the culmination of a vision he'd harbored since founding his company 15 years ago. As he made his way through the priority lane, his phone buzzed with messages from his executive team. Everyone was counting on him to close the deal. Darius had never failed them before, and he wasn't about to start now. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman," the gate agent greeted him warmly. "Stratus Air welcomes you aboard Flight 917. You'll be the first to board today." Darius nodded appreciatively. This was the standard treatment he had come to expect when flying first class with Stratus Air. For over a decade, he had been a loyal customer, accumulating enough miles to circle the globe several times over. The airline knew him by name, knew his preferences, knew exactly how he liked his experience to unfold. Or so he thought. The flight begins. Darius settled into seat 1A, the prime location in first class. The leather seat embraced him with familiar comfort as he arranged his belongings. His tablet contained the presentation he would deliver tomorrow, a masterpiece of business strategy and financial projections that would impress even the most skeptical investors. "Welcome aboard, sir," a flight attendant said, offering him a glass of champagne. "Can I get you anything else before takeoff?" "No, thank you," Darius replied with a polite smile. "I've already pre-ordered my meal." "Of course, sir. Lobster bisque followed by filet mignon, correct?" "That's right." The attendant nodded and moved on to the next passenger. Darius returned his attention to his tablet, reviewing the final details of the merger. Everything needed to be perfect. As the remaining first-class passengers boarded, Darius couldn't help but notice he was the only black person in the cabin. This wasn't unusual in his experience, especially in the upper echelons of business travel. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to being the only one who looked like him in boardrooms, executive lounges, and first-class cabins. It wasn't something he dwelled on. His focus remained on excellence, on proving through results that he belonged in these spaces. The plane took off smoothly, climbing into the clouds as Darius continued to work. The flight to Geneva would take approximately 8 hours, giving him ample time to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. The incident 2 hours into the flight, the meal service began. Darius could smell the aroma of fine cuisine wafting through the cabin as attendants set up white tablecloths and silverware for the first-class passengers. He saved his work and put away his tablet, anticipating the meal he had specifically requested. One by one, the flight attendants served the other passengers in first class. Darius watched as plates of caviar, lobster, and champagne were delivered with flourish to the other 6 men in the cabin. He waited patiently for his turn, expecting the same level of service. Finally, a flight attendant approached his seat, but instead of the lobster bisque he had ordered, she placed a tray containing a simple sandwich and a bottle of water before him. "I apologize, sir," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're out of the luxury meal options. You'll have to choose from the regular selection." Darius blinked, momentarily stunned by the discrepancy between what he had ordered and what he had received. "I'm sorry, but I pre-ordered my meal," he said calmly. "Lobster bisque and filet mignon." The flight attendant shook her head dismissively. "It must not have gone through. Happens sometimes." Before Darius could respond, she turned and walked away, attending to another passenger with a warm smile and attentive service. Darius stared at the sandwich on his tray, It wasn't about the food itself. It was about the principle, about the promise made and broken. He glanced around the cabin, observing as the other passengers enjoyed their gourmet meals, complete with wine pairings and dessert options. In that moment, a realization crystallized within him. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a system error or a simple oversight. The coldness in the attendant's tone, the dismissive shrug, the lack of any effort to rectify the situation, it all pointed to something much more insidious. For the first time since boarding, Darius felt not like a valued customer, not like a successful CEO, but like an outsider. The only black man in the cabin served a sandwich while everyone else dined on caviar. The strategic response, Darius's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest, the only outward sign of his internal struggle. Years of experience had taught him the power of restraint, of calculated responses rather than emotional reactions. He took a deep breath, his mind already shifting from disappointment to strategy. This wasn't the first time he had faced subtle discrimination, and he doubted it would be the last. But Darius Coleman wasn't someone who let such treatment slide. He was someone who used every experience, even the negative ones, as fuel for change. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Brandt, his assistant who was back at headquarters. "Everything okay?" Marcus had texted. Darius looked at the sandwich again, then at the other passengers enjoying their luxurious meals. He typed his response with deliberate precision. "Initiate internal audit protocol flight 917. Cabin crew ID needed. Confirm when ready." Marcus's response came almost immediately. On it, Darius knew that his request would set in motion a series of events that would change everything, not just for him, but for Stratus Air and everyone who flew with them. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, about ensuring that no one else would experience the same dismissive treatment he had just received. He pressed the call button, waiting patiently as a different flight attendant approached his seat. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" The older gentleman's tone was professional, but Darius detected a hint of wariness in his eyes. "I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant, please," Darius requested calmly. "I am the lead on this flight. Is there a problem?" Darius gestured to the sandwich. "I pre-ordered a luxury meal, lobster bisque and filet mignon. I was told it must not have gone through, yet I notice everyone else in this cabin is enjoying their pre-ordered meals. Can you explain why mine, specifically, was overlooked?" The lead flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. "I'll look into it right away, sir. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding." "Perhaps," Darius agreed, his voice level. "I would appreciate a thorough explanation." As the lead attendant walked away, Darius returned to his tablet, not to work on his presentation, but to document everything that had transpired since boarding. Names, times, exact quotes, all recorded with meticulous attention to detail. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Marcus Brandt was already accessing Stratus Air's internal systems. As Darius's right-hand man for over 8 years, Marcus knew exactly what his boss required without needing explicit instructions. The internal audit protocol was a code they had developed for situations exactly like this. Instances where Darius encountered what appeared to be discriminatory treatment. Within minutes, Marcus had identified the flight attendants on duty for Flight 917 and was combing through their employment records, customer feedback, and internal reviews. What he found confirmed Darius's suspicions. The flight attendant who had denied him his pre-ordered meal had a history of complaints, particularly from minority passengers in first class. The revelation halfway through the flight, the lead flight attendant returned to Darius's seat, visibly nervous. "Mr. Coleman, I've investigated the situation with your meal," he began, keeping his voice low. "Your pre-order was in our system. It appears there was a deliberate decision to prioritize other passengers." Darius maintained his composure, though internally his suspicions were confirmed. "I see. And who made this decision?" The lead flight attendant hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel matters, sir. But I want you to know that this is not reflective of Stratus Air's values or policies. I've arranged for the chef to prepare your original order immediately." "Thank you," Darius replied, "but I'm no longer hungry." The truth was, Darius had lost his appetite the moment he realized what was happening. This wasn't about food anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and ensuring accountability. "May I ask," Darius continued, his voice still calm, "how long you've been with Stratus Air?" 23 years, sir." "And in those 23 years, have you witnessed similar incidents?" The lead flight attendant's silence spoke volumes. "I understand," Darius said. "Thank you for your honesty." As the lead attendant walked away, Darius received another message from Marcus. Found it. Multiple complaints against flight attendant Melissa Chen for discriminatory service. HR buried the reports. Full documentation secured. Darius nodded to himself. Now he had what he needed, not just to address his individual experience, but to challenge a system that allowed such behavior to persist. The landing as Flight 917 began its descent into Geneva. Darius felt a strange sense of calm. The other passengers were chatting amiably, unaware of the undercurrents that had defined his journey. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, their smiles fixed in place as they prepared for landing. Darius's phone buzzed one final time before the landing announcement. It was Marcus again. "Everything is in place. Stratus Air CEO James Whitman will be waiting for your call." Darius smiled faintly. James Whitman was known for his public commitment to diversity and inclusion, for his speeches about equality and respect in the airline industry. Now, Darius would see if those values extended beyond words to action. The plane touched down smoothly at Geneva International Airport. As the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began gathering their belongings, ready to disembark. Darius remained seated, watching as the flight attendants bid farewell to each passenger with practiced warmth. When it was his turn to leave, he approached the lead flight attendant with a business card. "Please give this to Miss Chen. Tell her I look forward to our paths crossing again." The lead attendant took the card, his expression a mixture of confusion and apprehension. On the card was simply Darius's name and title. Darius Coleman, CEO, Coleman Enterprises. And beneath it, in smaller print, new majority shareholder, Stratus Air Holdings. What no one on the flight knew was that part of the merger Darius was finalizing in Geneva included acquiring a controlling stake in Stratus Air's parent company. It had been in the works for months, a strategic business decision that now carried personal significance. As Darius walked through the jet bridge, he spotted two airline officials waiting at the gate, their faces tense with anticipation. Beyond them stood James Whitman himself, the CEO of Stratus Air, who had flown in specifically after receiving Marcus's documentation. "Mr. Coleman," Whitman extended his hand, his expression grave. "I cannot begin to express my apologies for what happened on your flight." Darius shook his hand firmly. "I'm not interested in apologies, Mr. Whitman. I'm interested in change." "Of course, absolutely," Whitman nodded vigorously. "We've already begun a full investigation, and the staff involved will face immediate consequences." "That's not enough," Darius replied, his voice quiet but firm. "Firing a few individuals doesn't address the systemic issues within your company. What happened to me today was not an isolated incident, as I'm sure your HR records will confirm once they're properly reviewed." Whitman swallowed hard. "What do you propose?" "A complete overhaul of your training programs, hiring practices, and accountability systems," Darius stated. "And I'll be personally overseeing the implementation as part of the board's new Diversity and Inclusion Committee." "The board hasn't established such a committee," Whitman began, but stopped when he saw Darius' expression. "They will," Darius assured him. "First thing tomorrow morning, after our meeting." The transformation over the next 6 months, Stratus Air underwent a dramatic transformation. Under Darius's guidance, the company implemented comprehensive anti-bias training for all staff, established clear consequences for discriminatory behavior, and created transparent reporting systems for passengers who experienced unequal treatment. The flight attendant who had dismissed Darius, along with several others with similar complaints against them, were not simply fired. They were required to participate in extensive sensitivity training before being considered for reinstatement. More importantly, Stratus Air began actively recruiting diverse candidates for all positions, from flight attendants to executive leadership. The company's marketing materials were redesigned to reflect a broader range of passengers, moving away from the exclusive imagery that had once defined their brand. For Darius, the incident on Flight 917 was never just about a meal. It was about challenging the subtle forms of discrimination that persisted even in spaces that claimed to value diversity. It was about using his position and power to create lasting change, not just for himself, but for everyone who would come after him. 1 year after that fateful flight, Darius found himself on another Stratus Air journey, again in Seat 1A. This time, the first-class cabin reflected a diverse mix of passengers, and the service was impeccably equal for everyone. When the meal service began, Darius received exactly what he had ordered, served with genuine warmth and respect. As he enjoyed his lobster bisque, he couldn't help but reflect on how one moment of disrespect had catalyzed meaningful change. It hadn't required a public confrontation or a social media campaign, just a strategic, behind-the-scenes approach that addressed the root causes rather than just the symptoms. That was the Darius Coleman way, transforming challenges into opportunities, using his influence to open doors for others, and ensuring that respect and equality were non-negotiable in every interaction, every transaction, every flight. In the end, it wasn't just Stratus Air that had changed. The entire industry had taken note, with other airlines reviewing their own practices and policies to avoid similar incidents. What had begun as one man's experience had blossomed into a movement for accountability and respect that extended far beyond the confines of first-class cabin. And for Darius Coleman, that was the most satisfying outcome of all, knowing that his momentary discomfort had paved the way for lasting comfort for countless others who would never know his name, but would benefit from his quiet power move on Flight 917. Epilogue 5 years later, Darius stood at a podium, addressing the graduating class of his alma mater. Among the sea of faces before him were young men and women of all backgrounds, all eager to make their mark on the world. Success is not just about what you achieve, he told them, his voice resonating through the auditorium. It's about how you use that success to create opportunity for others. It's about recognizing that true power lies not in demanding respect for yourself, but in ensuring respect for everyone. As he spoke, his mind drifted briefly to that day on Flight 917, to the sandwich that had sparked a revolution. Sometimes, he reflected, the most significant changes begin with the smallest moments of injustice. Moments that, when handled with strategic precision, rather than emotional reaction, can transform not just companies, but entire cultures. Whatever field you enter, he continued, whatever heights you reach, remember this. Your greatest legacy will not be the wealth you accumulate or the titles you earn. It will be the doors you open for those who come after you, the standards you set, and the equality you demand, not just for yourself, but for everyone. The applause that followed was thunderous, but for Darius Coleman, the greatest reward was knowing that somewhere out there, someone was boarding a flight, sitting in a seat of their choosing, and receiving the respect and service they deserved. Not because of who they were, but because it was the standard that had been set, the expectation that had been established, the transformation that had been achieved. And it had all begun with a sandwich and a quiet determination to turn a moment of disrespect into a movement for change. That was the power of strategic thinking, of calculated responses, of understanding that sometimes the most effective revolutions aren't loud and public. They're quiet and persistent, changing systems from within until equality isn't extraordinary, but expected. That was the legacy of Darius Coleman and Flight 917. Not just a story of one man's experience, but a blueprint for how to transform individual moments of injustice into catalysts for lasting, meaningful change. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community, where we celebrate quiet strength, real struggles, and unexpected victories. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. The end.